With network security, it's absolutely one of those things where you have to be cognizant when we're dealing with mobile devices. It's not classical in nature, or you're not plugging a Cat 5 into anything. Um, Everything is going over the air, right? It's using a TCP/IP scheme for sure, but using Wi-Fi and 3G or 4G or LTE, which is nothing more than WiMAX, really. Um, uh, to perform services, as well as classic or basic SMS services, or Bluetooth, right? So having all these different platforms to achieve essentially what's the same end or the same goal, you have to take a different approach, because obviously your exposure factor begins to adjust or change depending on the mode of transmission that you're going to employ. So uh, absolutely, the principles of secure communication are fairly static, right? I mean, what holds true on a Wi-Fi network, by and large, I mean, there's some differences, of course, but is going to still hold true on a, classic Ethernet network, or often even a Bluetooth session, right? I mean, there's just different. Really, all you're talking about is it's a different mode or medium to get the data from point A to point B. So when we start talking about web applications or mobile applications, really, what are we talking about, right? So you can break them up into basic categories, really. Uh, One of them being web applications and services. You'd probably be most familiar with web applications like Gmail, right? Most everyone has a Gmail account, or a lot of people have a Gmail account. All that is a web application that you go www dot something, and pull up your Gmail, or if your office is using Google Apps or anything like that. And once again, those are just web applications. So the difference being, and most people just don't, I guess common individuals don't know or don't discern the difference between web applications and web services. Okay, so web app is the app itself, being like I said, Gmail or Google Apps or Wikipedia. The web service is the back end side of it. It's what's powering it. It's what makes it work, right? Whether you're using SOAP, whether you're using XML or single sign-on, right? So it's the engine, if you will, of the car, right? The car is the app. It's the thing that you can touch and smell and feel, and then the service behind it is what's driving it or pushing it. So understanding, we say that apps, right, and applications, web applications, adhere to REST, right? A concept identified as REST. Does anyone know what REST stands for? Is that a new term for you guys? I say that the apps are adhering to REST. Reusable, extensible, something to. Okay. Okay, so we'll just say Paul close, but not quite. Okay, so REST is representational state transfer. Okay, representational state transfer. If I can get my mouth to work today, representational state transfer is the concept of REST. What it's doing, states change based on either the client and or the server request. So the client is going to make a request of the server, for instance, to initiate a session. What does that what is that session? Well, that session can be a simple HTTP. I'm going to call up an HTTP service. You're going to deliver me a web page. The client makes a request based on that state change. The server answers the request, or uh, the state change could be the client is making a request to initiate a secure connection. It's a different handshake and it's a different negotiation that has to happen uh, based on that state change, right? So those are the basic understanding of REST, right? The client server requests. When we, for instance, use or call, the client calls on a service to initiate a secure connection. Um, I had your acronyms messed up. Yeah, that's all right. There are acronyms for everything. I mean, sometimes I see acronyms for acronyms, Paul. So don't feel bad. Um, a client making a request for a secure communication, we would indicate that that client is making a request to initiate an SSL or a TLS session, which all we're doing is requiring encryption before any further communication will be permitted. So now, once we make that call, uh, everything that happens throughout that SSL session will now be encrypted. But it's important to note and it's important to understand that SSL and TLS is not encrypting everything. It's just establishing a tunnel for you. Everything within that tunnel, by and large, is clear text. We're just going to wrap it around an encrypted tunnel to get you and get your data from point A to point B, so that bad actors not part of that session should not be able to plug into or siphon out of any of that data. So it's indicated, especially with web applications, that you should always, when you're calling outside of the network or outside of your trusted domain, be using SSL and TLS. Now, I think it's a very opportune time, right? To point out the latest threat, not a virus or anything else. It's a vulnerability to the Open SSL stack, which about 80% of the world was using. Uh, Mass hysteria, everyone panicking. Um, because what we were led to believe was encrypted and secure communications had an inherent flaw in it that allowed attackers to essentially eavesdrop into that encrypted tunnel. That's why I point out, right, the data inside that tunnel was all clear text data. It's HTTP wrapped up inside an SSL tunnel. So all the dangers of HTTP were present. It just wasn't known at the time, which obviously caused a lot of hysteria. Uh, Most everyone, or at least most all reputable organizations, or at least web organizations, updated and fixed their vulnerability. There are websites, for instance, that you can go to verify. Oh, what just happened there? Um, to verify that the wow, okay. Uh, that the vulnerability is fixed or whatever that website happens to be. Um, However, I mean, if you haven't found it, or if you're not checking those websites or changed your passwords, uh, absolutely would be a good idea to do so. Um, wow, everything just freaked out tonight, didn't it? Not going to admit defeat yet, but I tell you what, it's getting real close. Okay, pop back up. So now hopefully we're back and we're good. Lord, just the things that are going on this evening. Okay, so that is the theory of rest. Um, there we go. Let's switch it back to the right screen. There's just everything freaking out. Okay. And how web applications work, and why they tend to maybe give a false sense of security to end users. We can do the best we absolutely can from architectural design and input. However, there are just certain inherent weaknesses of the platforms that we use, right? What are those weaknesses? So some of these weaknesses, especially that we talk about when dealing with IP networking, things like IP spoofing and routing attacks and ICMP attacks, or pings, DNS attacks, DNS poisoning or what have you, faulty translation. So these are all things that I think we've heard ad nauseum over and over again. Pretty sure that at this point you guys know what each of them are. IP spoofing is nothing more than forging or faking your IP address to be a trusted IP address within whatever enclave or domain. Route attack, right? All I'm doing is diverting your traffic from where you wanted it to go to where I want it to go, hopefully without you, seeing it. Uh, Mass, sending thousands and hundreds of thousands of pings at someone's front door, right? Hoping to cause a denial of service, right? It's an ICMP attack. Uh, most, I think, on the foremost of most everyone's mind when they start thinking about attacks through the internet or the network, uh, you're starting to deal with DNS attacks, right? And DNS attacks are sometimes the most, I don't know, elegant to see happen. However, the most difficult to begin to protect against, because it uses an inherent weak link that's always going to be a weak link, being the user or the end device against itself. Right. Essentially, all you're doing is forcing it to resolve somewhere, forcing that system or computer to resolve to a destination that wasn't intended. Okay. Faulty translation. Is that a new term for anyone? Faulty translation. As I kind of prepared and read through each one of these, um, when I started doing this course, that was I guess a term that is I guess we'll call it new. I mean, when I was first starting a junior network or what have you, faulty translation, or at least with the definition that they're attaching to it, two different hosts with the same IP. So, me as a network engineer, I would call that I have a series of collisions going on my network. Two hosts with the same IP obviously is a very bad thing, 'cause now I don't know for sure who I'm talking to, and so it causes basically a mass "who are you? I am me" situation, where you begin a flood essentially um, in that subnet or enclave. Right. So I've never really addressed it as a faulty translation. Uh, However, somehow or another, CompTIA got enough people to buy into that two different hosts with the same IP, we're going to call a faulty translation. Like I said, I would call it more of a IP collision than anything else. Um, yeah, but you're right, Paul. The definition absolutely sounds more like IP poisoning or art poisoning uh, than it is anything that sounds like faulty translation. So that might just be one of the uh, pieces you highlight for yourself. Uh, Highlight it, make a note for yourself as you're getting ready to prepare for the exam, how you best view uh, two IPs on the same network. Uh, Faulty translation, like I said, for me would equal a network collision. For Paul, right, it sounds more like IP or IP poisoning. So whatever best helps you get past the exam requirement really is what I guess I would point out for you there. We can't get out of a discussion or a series on secure mobile application development and not get or at least touch on some of the threats to the telephony networks themselves, right? So um, I remember my first job, going in as an IT manager at a casino. Most all of the networks I had dealt with up to somebody actually gave me the reins, if you would, had been fairly modern networks. Everything running on modern, Cisco backend gear, up to date, at least for the time, operating systems. Um, I just kind of looked at awe, right, at this room that had all these blue and white wires, that was the public branch exchange, or the PBX, right? They were operating their own PBX, and one of my junior administrators had to show me how to use a butt set, right? I mean, I'd seen a butt set, years ago. I think I read about them in a book, but I never actually used one, or anything like that. So I mean, PBXs are, I mean, as I've carried on through my career, I mean, I've seen more and more of them. They are alive and well, and they're out there. So it has to be, I guess, spoken about at some level. The threat on telephony, right? So really, all a telephone is blue and a white wire, right? You take apart a Cat 5 cable, find the blue and find the white wire, and jack it in, and there's your phone line, right? You pick it up, make a call. Um, the, the idea that it is really truly that simple is why we say that the threat against telephony is so prominent, because there are still people that have home phones that pay a long distance bill. Uh, how many of us here still have a home phone? Out of, I think we got six attendees here. Simple, I guess, simple show, simple show of hands. So one person has a home phone, one doesn't. Yes, no. So it looks like, not since 2004. Yeah, okay. So uh, that is about what I see. Um, Usually I get a group of 10 people together. Three, or maybe four, still have a home phone. Um, uh, for whatever circumstance, I personally have not had a home phone since, I think, maybe 2000, maybe 2003 or 2002 or so. uh, what was the purpose, right? I was getting this, $40, $50 bill, plus, long distance every month, when I had a cell phone that all I had to do was account for minutes, regardless of where I was calling. So um, however, remembering that at the backbone of a lot of systems, there's still an old-fashioned PBX that your calls are riding on, which is nothing more than a blue-white line. So even in a TCP/IP VoIP operation, or voice over IP, you run the risk, if you are not encrypting those communication sessions, of an attacker listening in on that phone call, right? So depending on what, I guess, what eye you look at it from, whether it's a network or a security engineer, one would indicate, right, that we QoS networks, VoIP networks, to separate voice and data traffic. Uh, I, as a security engineer, say, because I want to separate my data from my voice. One is a lot easier to encrypt than the other. One has a lower reliability rate than the other. So I'm raising the confidentiality level when I segregate my, or QoS, my voice over IP traffic. You talk to a network engineer, and they'll give you the engineering perspective of it, which is nothing more than ensuring that the required data, which would be your data, is offered a higher availability than your voice traffic, which is offered often a lower availability on a voice over IP infrastructure. Two different people, two different focuses for the exact same implementation. So you kind of have to take it for what it is, and base your opinion on the requirement that you are trying to focus on. So that leads us to after telephones, after the old-fashioned PBX, blue white line, plugging in a butt set, listening in on conversations. They have no idea you're there. The next generation of messaging, if you will, is SMS messaging. We would call it text messaging. Text messaging really, I mean, I know my 9-year-old little girl uh, would prefer to send a text than talk on the phone. Um, and I have slowly noticed myself, I think sometimes for purely selfish reasons, that I will sooner send someone a text asking them for something or some action, or say hi or whatever, before I dial a number and place a phone call. Right. So, um, I don't know if I'm the only one that does that. I mean, it's kind of fast. You can tell that I'm raising a house full of technology junkies, because we will all literally be sitting in the same room, text messaging each other. I find it fascinating to watch. I mean, we're 4 feet away from each other, and rather than say a word, my little girl will send me a text message asking me to pass her the remote. Um, so what we, from a security aspect of text messaging, or SMS messaging, to be more specific, what we think of as a threat to SMS messaging is the fact that there are often, and there can be, uh, tolls, right, or what they call premium rates attached to text messages. It was real prevalent in back in the early 2000s or so, late 90s, where you would get essentially an unsolicited text message, and when you responded to it, it would keep responding back to you after you responded the first time. And essentially, when you responded the first time, you were authorizing them to, at that point, message that device or message that phone. And next thing you know, you get your cell phone bill, and what you were expecting to be a $50 bill or $60 bill was $600 and $700, and it was all in SMS text from services, usually overseas, right, somewhere out of South America, or uh, Guam, or what have you, that you were being charged a premium rate for text messaging, 9.99 for this messaging service, to something that you had no idea where it came from. So to combat that, Android, mandates that its users confirm that they acknowledge a premium rate when using the SMS service, and without that acknowledgement or confirmation, the message never gets sent. Right. So it seems like, I don't know, maybe. Um, a foreign idea to a lot of people, but especially younger individuals these days. Um, but I mean, such a simple idea of the user needing to confirm that they mean to send this text message that's going to cost them 9.99 was in reaction to the fact that that protection was never there before, and it caused an amazing amount of turmoil for cell carriers with these nine and $600 bills. So another important thing to understand is text messages. And you're going to ask Tiger Woods this, are stored, right? They're stored in the phone's memory. That's how you go back and you can pull up the conversation that you had with whoever, over SMS or over text messaging. They don't just go away. Uh, so depending on what the conversation was, now flash forward to today and some of the issues that we have with privacy and trying to ensure privacy, or as we develop applications, often mandating privacy, that you have a malicious application that is now able to read from the cached memory of your phone, specifically the SMS transmissions, offload them and send them somewhere else. I think everyone has probably had a conversation that they would prefer not be made public knowledge over text messaging. With a malicious application that can read into that cache memory. Now imagine if that conversation got out. Okay, it doesn't have to be anything too sinister, right? I mean, you could have a lawyer or a doctor, like me, that would prefer to send you a text message or an email before I send you or before I make a phone call to you. Have you ever wondered, for instance, why most all doctors' offices will call you. You'll get a voice answering service giving you a message, reminding you of an appointment or something like that before you get an email or a text message. Primarily because the guidelines of HIPAA prohibit or forbid unprotected data sources. And since they cannot be assured of the protection level of your device, they will call you or send you a recorded message before they ever often will send you any type of textual message, right? So that's where that's born from. APN hijacking. Okay, so APN hijacking, it is once again, it's very much alive and well. It's something that a lot of people think have kind of either gone by the wayside or it's just not a real danger or issue anymore. But when you just look at what it is, you can imagine. Well, yeah. Now I can absolutely see why that is still um, still a danger, right? So the steps, the basic steps of attack to perform an APN hijack, really all you're doing is it's four simple steps, right? You need to find somebody's phone number, right? Whatever your victim is. Select the right APM configuration by doing a simple IMSI lookup, right? You can find websites, right, that have IMSI lookup capability based on a cell phone number. Most all cell phones, I won't say 100% because I don't like working with that level of absolute surety, but let's say at least 90% of cell phones have the ability to be provisioned over the air. Does anyone have a cell phone that cannot be provisioned over the air? That you have to actually go into your cell carrier's business or store and have it provisioned or a phone number attached to it? No one's fessing up to it, so I would guess, yeah, probably not, right? I mean, like I said, it is such it's such commonplace. You call AT&T, they need to do an update to your phone. They do it over the air. They send you essentially all they're doing is sending you an updated APM configuration, um, and reprogramming reprogramming your phone. So so that would is step three, right? First, find the phone number, go on the web, do an IMSI lookup. Once you have that IMSI lookup, you deliver to that phone um, the updated or your uh, desired APM configuration, which is nothing more than a proxy configuration for them. Um, and then at that point, you own the traffic coming in and out of that device, right? Um, Regardless of the level of encryption. Remember, an SSL tunnel is exactly that. Anything, but at either endpoint or between or inside that tunnel is in clear text. Once I put a proxy or reprovision your APM to talk through me to your endpoint destination, whether you're encrypting that with SSL or not, I am in the middle of it, so I'm capturing the clear text of it. Okay. So that is APM hijacking, right? Um, it's an important note here. Android has tried to catch up with it because, like I said, it is extremely simple to do with depreciating the right APM settings permission in Android 4.0 and later. Okay, so there's a little more to it to update the existing APM um, settings and the modern or the later operating system 4.0 or later. Uh, However, it's not. I wouldn't indicate that it's impossible. It's just like I said. There's a little more to it. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because I think you know this. HTTP vulnerabilities. Yes, it's a clear text protocol. Yes, nothing is hidden. Yes, depending on the level of sensitivity of your data, you're violating at least the C of the CIA, if not others. Right. So. Raise your hand if this is new information for you. Otherwise, we're just we're just gonna keep on trucking. Okay. Man in the middle attack. So, man in the middle attack once again I think we've all heard it over and over again. I don't know that everyone necessarily knows how a man in the middle attack works or what it is. Um, so stop me if you've heard it before. However, just off the top of your head, would you consider a man in the middle attack an attack on the C, the I, or the A of the security triad? C, C and I, C, C, I. Okay, okay. All right. So pretty much everyone likes C, right? So attack on confidentiality. So understands that tells me essentially that most everyone knows the basics of a man-in-the-middle attack and what it is. You think your transmission is going from point A to point B, or I'm sorry, from point A to point C, when in actuality your transmission is going from point A to point B, and point B is then handing off your transmission to point C, and same thing in reverse. Point C is sending it back to point A, or I'm sorry, point C is sending it back to point B, and then point B is then forwarding it onto you. Now, depending on what the goal of the man in the middle attack is to trying to reach, absolutely, you would say that at first it's an attack on confidentiality, right? The data that you think is between you and one other party has now become between you and at least two parties, right? So sure, it is no longer confidential. However, I did see a few people, indicate that that they think it's an attack on integrity. Um, So let's expound on that a little bit. Who are my people? Let's see. Bo said integrity. Paul, integrity. So Bo and Paul. Okay, so why did you guys? Let's start with Bo for because you only chose integrity and left out confidentiality. So, Bo, why integrity over anything else? I'm gonna put Bo on the spot. Okay. Um, because you think it's kind of coming from A. Okay, so um, and this is where, and like I said, I mean, I've sat in several um, discussions, right, with um, other security experts. Um, that we've had this discussion, right? Is it an attack on confidentiality? Is it an attack on integrity? And essentially, we kind of at the end of 2 hours of heated discussion and a few beverages, kind of started to agree to disagree. That until we know more information about the question, we can't truly answer it because it depends on the goal. Of the attacker, right? If the goal of the attacker is to do nothing more than capture your data to use at another time against you. For instance, I get between you and your transmission or your session to your bank. The goal is I need access to your bank account, so I need your login information, your credentials to log into your bank account to then at a later time start making withdrawals or start otherwise performing an action as you. So when I'm actually performing the man in the middle attack, I'm not. And I want to be very careful not to alter the data in any way. I want it to get to point C intact. I'm not necessarily attacking the integrity of the data. As a matter of fact, it's kind of paramount to me to ensure that the data gets there as intended and as expected. I'm thoroughly only interested in attacking the confidentiality of it. However, change the motivation. You're logging into some other system where you're sending, I don't know, let's just say launch coordinates. And the launch coordinates are pointing at somewhere that I don't want it to point to. I want the launch coordinates to go elsewhere. So when I receive that transmission, I'm going to alter those coordinates to where I want it to be, pass it on to the receiving server uh, as if I were you, and if I've performed it correctly, it believes I'm you. So now I've altered the data and thoroughly have attacked the integrity of it. So absolutely, it's a little bit of a misleading or a trick question, but it indicates you have to be clear on the attacker's intent to know whether or not it's attacking or which part of the triad it's trying to attack. Okay, so that to me is always a fun conversation to have because it depends on a point of view and you need to know motivation behind it. So one of the ways that we try to combat man-in-the-middle attacks or attacks on transmission is requiring validation certificate, right? Or each server we now expect when we enter into an HTTPS session or we've initiated an SSL or TLS session that it have a certificate that we trust. Uh, and how do we indicate that it's a trusted certificate? We work through um, the paths, right? We talked about it a little bit before when we talked about encryption. Is the certificate chain is important to trust, right? Do I trust the top level CA? Do I trust any of the intermediate certificate authorities? If I do not trust the root, or I do not trust any one of the intermediates, then I must discard that certificate and search for a path otherwise that I would trust. What we look for uh, when we look at the certificate chain is that the chain must remain unbroken. Yeah, so I went and pulled, I get some just basic visual aids. Essentially, I think we've all seen the box on the the right, classic Windows machine. You go and you click up on the web browser the view certificate. Um, and then click the tabs, certification path. It'll show you the path of the and the trust level of the certificate you on the site that you are now visiting. If you see a red X in any one of those locations, you're going to get a red or a broken symbol up in the browser that there's something wrong with the certificate, and it at this point you've been duly warned, and you shouldn't be trusted. On an Android device, you'll often see a pop-up warning that is similar to the box on the left, where it tells you there's problems with the security certificate for whatever site you're visiting, and then it'll give you options, right, where you want to view the certificate or continue on. I'm going to ignore your warning for me not to do something stupid. I'm just going to keep doing it, or you can cancel out and go essentially back to start. So when we look at that the chart that the chain needs to be unbroken, what are we really searching for? We're primarily, first and foremost, we're searching for the validity state, right? Is this certificate expired? Uh, are there any properties within the certificate that are expected that now have been changed? We find this often when, if, for instance, e-commerce sites will change names for whatever reason, but they don't update, or they fail to remember to update their trust certificate. So now I navigate to a site that is www, I want, I don't know, drinkingcups.com. And but I had to change my name, so now it's going to www.iwantdrinkingcups2.com. But since my certificate does not match the properties of my domain anymore, it will cause my certificate to be untrusted. Then we look we look for whether or not the certificate has been compromised. Right, we would indicate that the private key of the PKI system or the public infrastructure has been exposed. Somebody either compromised it or inadvertently sent it out or what have you, and so now the private key is exposed. We don't know who has it, so that would break the chain of trust within the path, and then of course you can run into issues of the certificate being revoked. So now, just because the certificate is revoked does not indicate the site is not still operational. Right, I've seen many sites that are still up, running, and operational with the a certificate that's been revoked. Causes all kinds of hassles. However, users being users will begin to just click through, yes, I want to continue. Um, and then they kind of just do at their own peril, right? And then wonder why their bank account is a couple $1,000s lighter than it was the day before. So at this point, yeah, we're about there. Even with the late start, we take take a quick break here. We'll come back. We'll get into DNS hijacking, kind of what it is and how it works, and then into some of the attacks on data and how to protect against the actual database attack itself. All right. So, like I said, we'll take about a 10-minute break here, and we'll be right back. All right, so where we left off with DNS hijacking, and what is it? How is it performed? Like I said in the opening, to see it happen is a lot more elegant in design. It's actually kind of interesting to watch happen. Uh, Although the damage done with DNS hijacking can be and often is significant. The first thing that I guess understand uh, is with DNS hijacking. The only reason DNS hijacking is so we'll just say easy to perform is because it's using the human capabilities um, against itself. Right? Humans better remember names and letters than they do numbers. I mean, if we could remember, 53.2.3.5 and what correlating service or server that went to, then there would be no need for a DNS at all. However, it's just easier for us to type in google.com and trust that DNS is going to get us to where we intend to go. So to perform DNS hijacking, essentially all we're doing is we're putting in a pointer, right? I type in, you know, google.com and hit send. The server in the middle resolves, or I tell it to resolve instead of at the Google servers to some other server that I own, right? So essentially, I'm just causing an incorrect translation of the name to the IP address. uh, Generally, we see this with a lot with e-commerce and banking sites. I can stand up a site that looks extremely similar, almost identical in every way to your bank's home site. You think you have resolved to your bank's home site. It looks like it's supposed to. All the boxes are in the same place. I start entering passwords and usernames and everything else. However, somewhere in the middle, I poisoned the DNS, did a force update in the root DNS server to make it resolve on my server versus your server, regions or bank one or whatever, whoever you bank with. You start entering your credentials, username and password, and then you get a an error, right? Page not found, or bad credentials. Please try again, something like that. Um, and so you re-enter your credentials. Just maybe I might have fat fingered it. Put in your username and password again to make doubly sure that you're using the right one. And lo and behold, next thing you know, you land on your banking on your true bank's website. Essentially, all I did is put in another redirect after the first attempt with credentials. Give an error, caused the user to re-enter the credentials and then forward those credentials to the appropriate or intended resolute website. uh, all of this would go unnoticed by the casual user because they didn't look at the address bar to see that they have resolved not to regions.com, but regions247.com. Uh, so if they would have paid attention to the address bar, it would have been able to be to be bypassed, right? They would have known they didn't land where they thought they did. So at its heart, really, DNS hijacking, all it is making uh, your word translation translate incorrectly to a different IP address, right? At its heart, that's as simple and elegant as it is. Uh, Now, like I indicated, right? I poisoned the root DNS. Um, which, depending on your computing resources, can be substantial to try to do. However, if I can just gain access to your system, your computer, or your mobile device, and put in a new host file, that will also cause you to resolve to a different DNS or a different IP address, I'm sorry, than you intended, right? Just by simply altering the local host file on the computer. So it doesn't have to be an attack on an external service. I can perform the attack on the device itself to force it to resolve to a location of my choosing, rather than the user's intent. Okay, so don't think of DNS hijacking as an internet problem. It is alive and well on the devices themselves. Okay, from there, where do we move to? Right, so everything is outside the device, and host files, DNS poisoning, IP spoofing, ARP poisoning, or cache poisoning. Um, those are more they really are more client side attacks than they are server side attacks. When we move into the different types of server side attacks, essentially what we start talking about SQL injections, buffer overflows, cross-site scripting, cross-site resolution, validation, uh, things like that. Okay, so uh, that is what we begin to point at when we start talking about whether it's a server side attack or a client side attack. All of them have the same root cause at heart, right? It's just simply poor input validation. I didn't close the loop on my code. So, being that I didn't close the loop, it allows for extraneous characters, or characters other than what is required to bring back the requested information to be entered. At its heart, that is what a SQL injection is, right? I start entering words like password into a password field with a front end, or I'm sorry, that is calling back to a back end SQL server, and it dumps password files for me, right? Or it tells me password true, try this, right? That is just poor input validation. Okay, uh, so this is all based on what's referred to as Postel's law. Okay, Postel's law, quite simply, is a principle of robustness. Input sent should conform strictly. Okay, so if it's a password field, it should only accept passwords that fit the predefined characteristics. Input received should be accepted liberally. Okay, so so I'm gonna make you enter the password in a form that I've predefined, and then once I receive it, I am going to bounce it against every iteration on the backside to ensure the absolute match. Okay, so it's simply Postel's law is a principle of robustness, right? I would expect to see Postel's law on the exam, so take note specifically of Postel's law. Okay. Uh, Whitelisting and blacklisting, quite simply, and I think we're all familiar with it. Whitelisting is everything that I want to permit. If it's not in that list, then I don't allow it. Versus blacklisting, I try to make an exhaustive list of everything that I'm going to deny. Okay, so I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time on that. It's a pretty uh, well-known set of vocabulary there: whitelisting and blacklisting. The post versus the get. Okay, um, so being in a room full of programmers, uh, I guess I will. I guess I'll talk. Ask you. Um, Post or get? Do you have any thoughts on it? Is a post a more secure method or mode than invoking the get? Message about computer overloaded. Hmm, that's interesting. So you're getting an error message that the computer is overloaded. Hmm. So post is better. Okay. Always post is secure. Okay. Oh, you clicked the accent went away. Okay. Okay. Um, okay. All right. So it seems like Karen and Paul like the post. Do anyone have any ideas or prefer a get over a post? No. Okay. Um, Post. Okay. So I mean, it's okay. So it seems like most everyone invokes a post rather than a get. For and as as you mentioned, right, for somewhat the obvious reasons, it begins to obscure data. It's not that it's one necessarily is a more secure practice than another. However, layered in with other factors, uh, I would indicate that yeah, I would probably invoke a post before I would invoke a get, especially when I'm dealing with sensitive data input, right? So the top illustration there is a perfect illustration of what I would expect to see, especially if I'm trying to see if a site is susceptible to SQL injection. Now that they're invoking a get with it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start playing with the combinations. User, for instance, user equals true, password equals password, and see if I'm going to get any type of response. Even an error response gives me, for instance, something. Sometimes, it'll enumerate for me, or SQL is extremely helpful in that manner. That it'll send me an error message trying to tell me what it thinks that I thought to type. and then it'll enumerate the file structure for me. So now I know how to start playing with the file structure, right? Whereas if they would have just required a post, it would have been obscured, and would have made my job a little harder. Okay, so it all depends really, once again, on the sensitivity of the data. Absolutely, usernames and passwords, I would say, yeah, you probably want to default to the post. If you're just simply calling up items in a catalog, yeah, maybe a post will get that done, because I would not necessarily indicate that data should be protected at a higher sensitivity level. So often it becomes um, uh, data dependent, on how you're going to require input. So that will so that moves us to the cross-site scripting, and what it is. For testing purposes, they ask you to identify whether this is a SQL injection, a buffer overflow, or a cross-site script. What I will tell you, or what I will give you as the tail or the tell, uh, look for the look for the Java language in it. Uh, SQL injections will not have, by and large, I won't give you 100%, but 80% of the time, you are not going to see a SQL injection or a buffer overflow that is operating with JavaScript. Okay, it's almost like I said, it's a higher rate of success for cross-site scripting, or when they're trying to enumerate cross-site scripting. Go find the JavaScript, and you'll be okay. So a little bit of, I guess, test or exam help more than anything else. So, what is the cross-site script, right? So, simply, it's a script that manipulates the cookies on the machine, right? Whether they be persistent cookies or session cookies, what it is doing, it is running a script against those cookies, and usually hoping to find a persistent cookie that's storing credentials. So then I can invoke the script to offload to another location. When we talk about cross-site scripting, we talk about basically two different types: reflected or stored. Okay, so the way to tell them apart, a reflected cross-site script attack is the client is carrying the script payload. Okay, versus the stored. On the stored, it's executing scripts from the server side. Okay, so reflected, the client is carrying the script payload to the particular site that is being exploited, versus the stored attack, which is the server side of it, invoking and carrying or executing the script. As you can imagine, the stored cross-site script is somewhat more difficult to explore or invoke, because you have to deliver a payload to what should be a secure server to execute the script upon negotiation. Um, so it is a lot more difficult to pull off. However, often it reaps much higher benefit than a one-off attack where you're dealing on a client-by-client type of attack. So the countermeasure to whether it's a reflected or stored attack is to invoke and require that you must validate the HTLM, right, before carrying through the session. Um, or tie, require, for instance, a signature, and tie it to a specific IP address, the session cookie itself to a specific IP address, so that if the credentials are compromised, if they do not at that point manipulate their IP, or their host destination, that the script will not be successful, because it's not coming from what has been uh, pre-validated as a known good host. Okay, so those are the two. Like I said, that I pulled out because they're real easy to test against, to see if you truly understand the vulnerabilities and the countermeasures of cross-site scripting, right? And I would say I see tying the session cookie to a specific address more often than I see anything else. Okay. Okay. So cross-site forgery request, or I'm sorry, a cross-site request forgery. So while they sound like, and in some ways are similar to cross-site scripting, there are very distinct differences between the two. So, cross-site scripting, it's an attack against the user, usually aimed at stealing site credential. Um, cross-site cross-site request forgery is a attack on trust. Okay, so it is integrity based versus cross-site scripting, which is confidentiality based. So that's the key delineation between the two types of attacks, especially when you're taking a security based exam, how to figure out what the question is asking you. The First, is it asking me a confidentiality based question or integrity based question? The confidentiality based answer, with, for instance, three answers um, presented, being buffer overflow, cross-site request forgery, and cross-site scripting. If I determine that I'm needing to find a confidentiality-based answer, I have to go to cross-site scripting, because that is an attack on confidentiality. Cross-site request forgery is an attack on trust. Okay, the website is falsely or incorrectly trusting the user, more the user's browser than actually the user itself. Okay, so unlike the cross-site scripting, which exploits the trust of the user, right? It's attacking the confidentiality of the user's credentials. Cross-site request forgery exploits the trust that the site has in the user's browser. Okay, it's coming from a trusted location, it's coming from a trusted device, so I trust it. That is the cross-site request forgery. The core countermeasure, or mitigation for it, is uh, to not allow XML files on the server, for instance, to grant Silverlight or Flash control. Okay, uh, absolutely right there. Kind of the other ones kind of go without saying. You may not have heard of the second one here: authenticate at every potential security issue. Okay, so that's extremely um, large to kind of delineate through. And so it makes it very hard to test against. However, no XML files on the server that grant Silverlight or Flash control, very easy to test against. Okay, decreasing cookie expiration time, right? So even if you're going to use session cookies, uh, force refresh at a high rate, right? That rate will be kind of delineated by the sensitivity of the data, but don't allow that session cookie to persist, for instance, for the entire session. Cause it to refresh at some predictable or maybe unpredictable rate, forcing reauthentication at some level. Okay, so those would be the core countermeasures or mitigations to cross-site request forgery. All right. So heap spraying attack. So this is one. This gets. I think I think it's deep in your guys' wheelhouse. Probably something you guys deal with often. Is first understanding what the heap is, which in a room full of programmers, I would indicate that you probably do. uh, what is the heap spraying attack. Essentially, attackers just allocating blocks, large blocks of in memory heap with malicious code to run uh, in the background, right? It causes a high instability in devices. Mostly, you're going to see this when the design or the goal is a DOS attack of some sort, um, uh, always accompanied with an escalation in privilege. Right, so generally that malicious code on the backside that they're storing in memory heap. What is it doing? It's waiting, kind of laying and waiting, waiting for an admin service or user to invoke its privilege or enter its credentials. At that point, it will elevate its credentials to that user and then carry out its mission. Okay. Um, the heap spraying attack like I said, uh, it's hard to detect. Um, you can generally begin to detect it, especially if you pay attention to your system services on the device. Does it seem like a higher amount of registered memory or used memory is being used on the device, what I would expect to see for the load on the device. Okay. So once again, you'd have to know that you're looking for it more to detect it than a casual user would ever really truly be looking for. I think last time I asked, most everyone said that they were Java people. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, in this room. Um, how about SQL? I mean, are any of you guys SQL programmers or database administrators? Have a hobby that you just like to play with SQL databases, because you're just a glutton for punishment that way. Work with SQL quite a bit. Okay, all right. Bo, I think this section will probably be pretty boring to you, um, because you know what SQL language looks like. Hate SQL, but use it a lot. Okay. Honestly, this is one of those areas of my career that as I began getting into technology, I kind of wish I would have paid probably more attention to, especially as I got later in my career, where I might wanted to just stand up a quick dirty database to run through some vulnerability findings, and wanting to be able to structure them and look at trends and whatnot. And I had a guy on one of my teams a few years ago that was just a whiz with SQL, and I had this issue where we were collecting a lot of data all the time, and sometimes from sites that we had seen or visited several times, that I wanted to see what was the trend, right? Have we seen this on this machine last year or the year before when we came, and what was the mitigation or the mediation? What have you. So I really wish I would have paid, kind of more attention, because he was able to knock out just a quick, quick, dirty little database that pulled all this stuff in and spit it back out. I think in less than like a week, which was extremely impressive to me, especially for someone that I know enough, pretty much about enough about SQL to make myself dangerous. I'll lose your data, that's for sure. Um, but I will not be able to structure it very well. That's kind of just not my job. It's kind of not what I specialize in. Okay, so room full of job, and also a room full of people that use SQL often. The power of SQL. You're familiar with the power of SQL, so you should also be extremely familiar um, with the vulnerabilities or the weaknesses of the SQL structure, the structured query language in and of itself. Okay, it is client and server side technology. Essentially, all it's doing is taking a bunch of random meaningless data, pointing at each other, and making it meaningful to someone else. However, whenever you store a cache of wealth somewhere, someone's going to want to get it. And depending on how well you structured the database, someone like me, like I said, that I know enough about SQL to start pounding on databases to get information out of it that I want. Uh, Performing SQL injections, uh, less to cause havoc, or actually more to cause havoc, less to be useful. So I'm not going to really spend a lot of time here, since it looks like most everyone are extremely familiar with SQL. So just hitting the highlights with it to make sure that you have the testable information. Um, what is a command or a SQL injection? Essentially, all I'm doing I'm manipulating the SQL query to dump some amount of data from the backside to the front side where I am, and it's consumable. Okay. Or I want to be able to dump, for instance, your structure, so that then I can manipulate the structure to, for instance, create a new user, so I no longer have to get or compromise credentials. Uh, I'll just create a user within the SQL database that is me, where me didn't exist before, with credentials that I know, and at a privilege level that will allow me access to the backside data. Okay. How do we protect against SQL injections or SQL vulnerabilities? Uh, the core is input validation, right? Which is kind of conspicuously missing from here. Um, I would kind of expect that to be in big flashing letters somewhere. However, implementing whitelists for allowable queries. Okay, so I'll buy that as input validation. I'm only going to allow these sets of queries to be run, and in this manner and in this structure. Would be a core, or a good mitigation against the SQL injections. Okay. Okay. So uh, now we've kind of come full circle, right? So how do I ensure or make sure that all of these attacks uh, expend more resources by the attacker than the data that I'm housing? So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the level of resource requirement past the point where it is conceivable to spend resource for the data cache that you will that you will receive. So, for instance, with authentication, ensure the app is communicating with the right system. Force it, for instance, to require the signature or the certificate from the system that it thinks or it should be communicating with. Maintain or with all that you can maintain the confidentiality between the systems as it's transmitted. That is why we would indicate that you would invoke SSL or TLS. Um, I have not seen this exam start breaking out the versionings yet. I mean, one. I would hope. I mean, everyone has my contact information. If they move to an iteration on the exam where they start harping on a version of SSL or a version of TLS, let me know. Right now, it just essentially wants to make sure that you know that there is such thing as SSL and there is this such thing as TLS. TLS the uh, is the next iteration of SSL, right? We went through SSL 1, 2, and 3. It changed when it moved into a standard by the IEEE, and then they renamed it TLS. Okay, uh, there are technical engineering differences between the two. However, the mode of operation between SSL and TLS extremely similar, and for a test at this level or an exam at this level, I wouldn't expect them to get into the details or the technical engineering details between how SSL operates and how TLS operates. Okay, so uh, but when we invoke SSL or TLS, once again, all we're doing is invoking a level of encryption, wrapping clear text data into an encrypted tunnel. Why are we doing that? Primarily to prevent eavesdropping into the data set, right? To protect or try to protect the confidentiality of the data. That's what SSL and TLS is all about. It does a real good job with preventing replays, right? Replay attacks. We didn't talk about replay attacks, but um, replay attacks, and I don't think, well, yeah, no, we won't get too deeply into replay attacks, but that is one of the considerations behind SSL and TLS is it forces a constant negotiation to ensure who you're talking to is who you think you're talking to through a series of challenge response. So, core difference again, we dealt with HTTP and the vulnerabilities associated with HTTP. Elementary, I think, at this level, understand HTTP and HTTPS. What is the difference? The difference is HTTPS is HTTP wrapped up in SSL. Uh, Not to be confused with SHTTP. Okay. Uh, that is a common question. I have not seen grandfathered yet because I'd have to assume that just people are still not drawing into the differences between HTTPS and SHTTP. So, do you guys know or understand the difference between HTTPS and SHTTP? Yes. Okay. All right. So Todd, yes, 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 yes. Okay. All right. So okay, good. So we won't get into that. So I'll just pull out once again the highlight for you. HTTPS, HTTP wrapped up in SSL. It's using a shared secret key. So as soon as you see shared secret key, are we indicating that we're using symmetric or asymmetric encryption? Okie dokie. There we go. All right. So yes, shared secret key is the tell, right? And now I know that I'm dealing with some sort of symmetric encryption. I'm sharing the same, so it's going to be fast. It's going to be reliable, uh, but it has its inherent weaknesses that we talked about earlier. So. But that's why it uses the shared secret key because it is fast, it's reliable, and it meets the requirements of encryption that you would expect. Okay, so one of the things that like I said, we've dealt with in the last few weeks is the Heartbleed vulnerability. Prior to that was did did speak, Mike. Uh, Diginotar. There we go. Uh, what was it? How? What was the issue? Uh, Essentially, 500 or so. There's a few more that we found. Fraudulent certificates granted for top level um, agencies, right? From the CIA, M16, a host full of others that just essentially just caused full havoc, right? So issued a certificate for the CIA without ever validating that the requester was the CIA. You can imagine the worldwide panic that that caused. Uh, to understand, to this conversation and make it, germane to this conversation, why do I have a problem uh, with a top level CA issuing certificates um, uh, to an organization called CIA? Well, what that tells me is I can't necessarily fully rely on the top level CA. So what I can do is I can implement the encryption within my own app, right, within the own application with the servers that I control, right, and initiate trust from those or from that authority level rather than trusting external certificate authorities. Okay. So that is an option for me. And once again, depending on the sensitivity of the data, I would probably force myself, for instance, to trust my certificate chain first, and then go to the external certificate chains that are untrusted. Now, it's not to say that, for instance, VeriSign should not be trusted, but I don't control VeriSign. I can control my own input output servers that the app is going to communicate with. So that way, I have a higher degree of certainty against compromise. Does that make sense? Okay. Once again, I mean, this is a pretty picture of how TL, or I'm sorry, yeah, TLN and SSL work. Um, a lot more complicated than this, but it's a series of challenge response to initiate a session, which is why the initial standing up of the tunnel can be slow. At least a few years ago, before the machines got more horsepower, it was somewhat slow and cumbersome. But this is the basic steps to it, right? So it sends a request. The server side says, "Yep, okay, think I can handle that. Here's my certificate. I'm going to prove to you who I am. Okay, so I'm going to check against. All right, so your driver's license looks good. What language do you talk? Uh, they go through a series of negotiation on what is the best language for both of them to make sure that one's not speaking French and the other is speaking Spanish. It runs through an algorithm, which is once again beyond this course necessarily, to exchange keys. uh, it sends off, here's my session key, but it's just between you and I, and okay, got it. And now we have an encrypted tunnel all set up. Do I expect you to see this picture on an exam? No. However, will you at some level be quizzed on what the challenge response looks like? Yes, I would, because it is where it's invoked from. Remember, an SSL uh, session is invoked by the client. However, the client does not issue the challenge first. The challenge uh, first is received by the client uh, by the issuance or the making available of the server side's certificate. Right. So the client isn't going to prove to the server that I am who I say I am. It requires the server to prove to it that it is who it says it is, and that it is of uh, a high integrity to begin exchanging data, right? So that is why, like I said, you're going to be um, caused to identify where what portion is being invoked from versus seeing a pretty picture on it. Okay. And this is just more of it in words, but once again, uh, take note, right, of the steps, right, what the client is doing versus what the server side is doing. Um, and then, of course, if it doesn't get an accurate or timely response, the client should then terminate the session, right? And that's an important note to take here, that it should terminate the session and not just fall back to HTTP. If it cannot successfully negotiate an SSL connection, it should end all communication. Okay. And then once again, as I highlighted before, a self-signed certificate is okay, but only if you control the server itself, right? You're going to run into all kinds of authentication errors and issues when when you have a self-signed certificate, but you don't control the server, and then trust issues are going to start prevailing. Okay. All right, so we're about up on our next break, and I think that this is probably a good place to stop here. Most of the rest of it is going to be a lot of review. Then we'll move into the next section. All right, so let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break here. All right. Okay, so we left off with um, moving into trust and trust validation. This is once again why the trust in the certificate chain has to be or should be invoked at every level. And if you don't control the external server, it is perfectly acceptable for you to operate with a self-signed certificate between you and your host server that your application is communicating with, to ensure the confidentiality or the integrity level of the data transmission across the network infrastructure services. Okay. All of this to ensure that the application is communicating with the server that it intends to communicate with. Okay, once again, we've gone through this before. This isn't new. This is more content than context for you. So I don't think we need to harp through this at all. Once again, it's just identifying the two-way authentication, or the challenge response, if you will, between server side and client side for you. Again, more content than context. Uh, we spoke about this specifically when we dealt with encryption and where the trusts come from. So what I'm going to do here essentially is just pull out the high level stuff for you to make sure that you have an understanding and a grasp of it, rather than go too deeply into any one of them. Okay. So the certificates, if it's issued by a CA, it's recognized by Android. Okay, that's pretty simple to understand. All the top level CAs come by default with a level of trust. Okay. However, if it's issued by a CA that is not recognized at the top level, it is not by default loaded into the trust chain by the Android operating system. It will have to be loaded, or you'd have to encourage your user upon, for instance, install, to invoke the trust of, for instance, your self-signed server and client certificates. Okay. Um, and then of course you move to the self-signed certificates. It's not issued obviously by a top level CA, so once again you're going to have to encourage the user to initiate trust, because it is not going to be there inherently and automatic. So it's a difference between VeriSign, which is default, versus GoDaddy, which upon its inception had issues with trust, right? Then you move into the different types of SSL certificates. I pulled out the top three offenders for you. The ones, once again, that you're going to see most often on the exam. Uh, First being the high assurance SSL certificate. Uh, what the high assurance certificate is or does is the identity of the owner has been verified. It went through actual physical examination. Someone visited, for instance, the building that they said the address was, and it just wasn't some post office box somewhere. The wildcard SSL. The wildcard SSL certificate is going to cover the subdomain, right? So, us.u.com, the wildcard SSL certificate is going to cover the u.com portion of it, not the top level being the us.u.com. Okay, so that is the takeaway there with the wildcard SSL, is it's there to ensure the validity of the subdomain to the parent. And then code signing. That's the one that you guys will, once again, if you don't see it at least a couple times on this test, I would be highly surprised, because it's reinforcing, right, that the developer, the publisher of the software, the application, is self-signing or signing its own certificate to ensure the authenticity of the software. For instance, Microsoft has several of its own certificates. And it's even gone so far to use their certificates to ward against piracy and counterfeit. That if you don't have their certificate, it's deemed a non-genuine Microsoft product, for instance. Okay, so the certificate used to ensure authenticity of software is the code signing certificate. Wildcard SSL covers the subdomain of the parent, and the high assurance certificate, the owner has has been verified through some sort of physical identity examination. Once again, we talked about this, the certificate fields back when we dealt with encryption. The core, the key all of our certificates are dealing with X509 as the standard. It's all going to have or requires to be within standard the same fields designated for the certificate, from all the way from what version it's using down to what's the serial algorithm, public key, um, subject, the validity dates, and so on. Okay, excuse me. So that's the fields of the X509 certificate. Okay, so now this might be new, may not. So stop me if this is new to you, but I don't think it's going to be extremely new. We're dealing with digest authentication and what it is, and when to invoke it, and what have you. So digest authentication, it is. Um, uh, what it does is it hashes your passwords, right? It hashes the passwords and sends that hash over HTTP. So that should tell you that it's going to be, the hash is going to be sent in clear text. I'm going to be able to read the hash of your password. Um, However, I mean, obviously that's a little better than sending just the plain text of your password over the clear text HTTP protocol. The digest authentication uses what's called nonces. Okay, what the nonce does is it protects or prevents against a rainbow table attack. And once again, we talked about a rainbow table, and what it was during the encryption portion of this instruction. So, the takeaway here, we're trying to find keywords to associate with the top level understanding. Digest authentication. When we're dealing with digest authentication, I am going to send your hashed password over clear text. I invoke nonces to protect against rainbow table attacks. Obviously, not as secure as HTTPS, which is a full encrypted tunnel, but better than sending clear text password over a clear text protocol. The main vulnerability of the digest authentication mode of the ID, authent, and author series is it is vulnerable to the man-in-the-middle attack. So because you sent your password hash, if I could capture the hash, in theory, I would be able to reverse the hash against a rainbow table to find out what the password was in the middle of your authentication services. Okay. Guidelines for network communication. Once again, let's just pull out the things that might be unknown to you, or maybe that we just want to reiterate at this point. Knowing kind of the makeup of this group of individuals, I would almost indicate that's why I pulled out just these three core, right? So obviously never are going to trust a public Wi-Fi network, since you have no control essentially once you publish that application to that device, whether or not it's running on public Wi-Fi. The default posture you should be in is it's always running on public Wi-Fi, and then invoke the proper requirements or protection levels for the data, assuming that it's running on a public Wi-Fi. don't trust data coming from a server. Now that sounds like a kind of a large blanket statement. Essentially, what it's indicating is you shouldn't be trusting data that's not coming from your server, right? You don't control it. You can't vouch for the validity of its security implementation or requirements. So it should always be deemed as untrusted. And then always encrypt your network communications. Anytime you are going to communicate outside of the boundary of the device, at that point, that data transmission should be using some level of encryption. Okay. Those are the things, once again, that I want to be sure to pull out for you to make sure uh, that it's understood. And once again, it's more um, trying to ensure that you're successful through the examination with things that may not just be second nature to you. Okay. Um, so when we deal with server authentication and how the authentication happens, and what is happening throughout the authentication negotiation, understand, once again, you're seeing all of the same things begin to happen again, but now we're going to kind of just inject the specific calls or commands into it. Okay. So what we're looking to do here is establish asynchronous connection to a web server. So asynchronous should automatically, you should see a picture of a clock, right? Anytime you see the word asynchronous, see the picture of the clock and then smash it, right? Asynchronous, it is not time based. It's not time sensitive. It's not relying on a threshold of time to pass or not pass as it performs each step, only that each step is executed. Okay. By establishing the asynchronous communication with that server, uh, first, obviously, it's going to call through the clear text port because that is the default, the HTTP protocol. It's going to use HTTP URL connection as the call or the instance to initiate the connection. Then it will switch to HTTPS URL connection once the client server negotiation begins. Okay. Uh, Once that negotiation begins, it will go through its validation steps by receiving the certificate from the server side. You will check the validity of that certificate and the trustworthy of the chain. You'll negotiate the cipher that you are going to use, whether it's AES or DES or Twofish or whatever language both server side and client side can speak. It will always default to the highest level of encryption that both client and server are capable of executing. So if both client side and server side are capable of executing at AES 128, then that will be the negotiated cipher. However, if the server side can negotiate at 128, or I'm sorry, AES 128, but the client side can only operate at triple DES, then that the server will come down to the client side uh, uh, understanding and bring itself down to triple DES if the server does not or is not capable of uh, operating in a mode of 3DES. It will continue to work down until they find a negotiated cipher, or it will terminate the session and end. Okay, so that's the important thing to understand through the negotiation process as the SSL connection or the XSL tunnel is established. Okay, so what do the classes within the HTTPS URL connection um, methods perform. Okay, so get cipher suite. It is exactly what we just spoke about. It's going to negotiate the cipher. It's going to exchange. Here is my list of languages. Here is your list of languages. It will compare them. It will choose the highest, and it will move on. Get server certificate. Obviously, right as the name kind of indicates, lists the certificates that identify the server. Okay, get server certificate is the certificates that identify the server. Uh, get host name verifier is only returning the host name of the requesting client. Okay, and then get host name. I'm sorry, get default host name verifier, again returning the default host name of the client side. Notice that there is no requirement established here for the client side to uh, prove to the server uh, what or who it is. Just here's my name, and can I please see your driver's license? Okay, so it's very much in reverse, and that's why I want to make sure that you keep it straight in your head. Okay, so the keep alive setting. Keep alive setting, while it is extremely, let's say, convenient, um, mainly because users like the keep alive setting, for instance, to be set at true. Because you're going to use less system resources, because you're not going to be constantly renegotiating over the mobile network. It does cause somewhat large security issues um, when the keep alive setting is set to true, mainly because that connection is always up, right? So kind of the way I've always just remembered the good and the bad of the keep alive setting. Difference between the old days of AOL dial up. Um, and then when I was able to get a cable modem, or DSL, one's always on. My AOL dial-up, I had to go through, dialing into a modem to get connected to the internet. One was more cumbersome than the other. One was more convenient than the other. However, absolutely, both of them had their unique security challenges between the two of them. All right, so that is the importance, really, of the keep alive setting. Is I mean, you're limiting the attack surface. Uh, yes, you're also dealing with the availability portion of the triad, right? Kind of that always on connection is more raises the availability. However, it also raises the attack vector, or the ability to inject uh, data or extract data. Okay. Okay, so the host name verifier. So what is the host name verifier doing? Remember, I told you that this is nothing to do with the client side proving who it is. Right, the server at every level had to prove to the client that it is what the client thinks it is to begin transmission and talking. So how do we invoke a higher level of security on the client side? Well, this is where, for instance, the wildcard is introduced, right? I can indicate that through the negotiation, when the host name verifier is requested, that it requires a strict host name verifier, for instance. So the strict host name verifier, the wildcards are allowed only at the specific subdomain level that I have identified, right? So I am going to allow everything under dot ourcompany.com. So the the matches it's going to permit. If it doesn't match, it's going to drop. Okay, so matches catalogserver.ourcompany.com. All right, we're good there. However, if the fully qualified domain name is us.catalogserver.ourcompany.com, it is not going to match and it's going to drop. Uh, so that's one way to begin narrowing in exactly who and at what level the client is going to be able to communicate. Uh, Further, right, allow all host name verifiers. So allow all typically is a bad thing, right? I want to permit by exception, not by default. So it is the opposite or converse to strict hostname verifier. Essentially, it disables the hostname verification altogether. So the server is going to make that hostname verification call. However, I'm going to answer back with allow all hostname, um, and that is it's going to disable the hostname verification. It's going to return true, right? If their certificate comes from a trusted certificate authority, regardless of URL, whether the URL host name matches the host or not. So that is a real good testable material for you to know when to use what and what it does, especially when trying to tie it in with the wildcards. Okay. And so here are some examples of how to set whichever hosting verification method your data requires. We're not going to walk necessarily through each step of those because I think you guys are fairly well versed in each. Okay. So custom host name verifier. So once again, the point here is granularity. To add granularity, not complexity, right? So by making sure, for instance, first I'm going to require the host name strict host name verification. Further, I can take it, to the next step and require or indicate custom verification, right? To make it work through an additional layer of requirement or granularity, so that I narrow it in. That it's going. I narrow in the test criteria during that interchange so that it rejects certificates issued by a certificate authority. Now, this requires a constant refresh, for instance, of the trust chain, uh, having to add in or take out trusted CAs. So you're naming by name who you are not going to trust, and I do that through the custom verify function. However, it is going to require additional additional resources because you're going to have to constantly update essentially that host file, right, as to who you're going to drop or reject. So keep that in mind while it is or can get extremely granular. It will raise system resource requirement, which ultimately is going to bring down system resource availability. So now we have to figure out whether the CIA is balanced based on the sensitivity of the data. Okay, if that makes sense, right? So it all goes back to the balance in the CIA. Uh, okay, so finally, so that will move us to certificate pinning, right? So the vice specific identifier, which I'm going to drop everyone in a list. Certificate pinning provides protection against compromised certificates. Okay, so this is, for instance, um, where you would invoke, for instance, your own self-signed certificate, um, so that the device never goes out looking for a top level CA for trust, because you have initiated or by pinning your certificate to the application, that this is the only one that you're ever going to see. It's the only one that you're ever going to need, and until explicitly told otherwise, this is the CA to be used. Okay, so that kind of is the basic premise behind certificate pinning. We saw this being, a massive issue, for instance, with the DigiNodar um, uh, CA, because it literally, and this is true, right? It's signed certificates to mail.google.com. So you can imagine the issues that would cause, right? If I can go get a root CA to issue me a certificate for mail.google.com, how much data can I begin to siphon? Okay. And then, I'm sure we've all seen the little button, right? You're getting ready to go to somewhere that we can't verify, we can't trust. What do you want to do? Go back or continue on? And how many of us or our users just click, oh, yeah, continue on. I know what I'm doing. Right. So uh, that is where certificate pinning comes in handy, because essentially you're going to pin a self-signed certificate to your app, and that's the only app that will be trusted for data communication within the data stream. Okay. All right. And so that brings us to the end of this section. There is a lab associated with it. Walking through it, extremely, I think, for this group, somewhat elementary. Um, it doesn't take very long to get through at all, and it just kind of reinforces some of the other concepts throughout the module. Okay, so and like I said, we're getting through the next one should be or will be extremely quick, because it's just not that long a section. So we're going to just go ahead and jump right through this section. And if I check the time, yeah, I think we're good on time. So I think we're kind of still right on time to get through 8 and 9. Okay, this is Module 8. Module 8 deals with using the WebView component in a secure manner, something a little more than the out of the box configuration. Um, so, what is the WebView component? How does it interact? Why do I care? The WebView component really is just okay. It's a list of the live connections, right? I mean, I kind of akin it to going in and doing a netstat, right, on a Windows machine. It shows me all the up and live connections, and what services and ports are being used. What we're going to try to do through this section is just identify the countermeasures for the WebView component, and then how to implement the security against it. So what does it do? Right, displays web pages in activity. So Windows level correlation is it's like doing a netstat. Okay, it shows me everything that's up, live, and running. Basic navigation controls, back button, zooming, and search. Um, it's an alternative to the external browser. Okay, so that is what the WebView component does. It's important to note that it can integrate JavaScript, and we've kind of learned through the modules this instruction where Java, while it can be our friend, can also turn against us if we don't employ it safely. So the primarily the security risks that we associate with WebView and the vulnerabilities, right there, top of the list, JavaScript injection, uh, local file access, right, which we've discussed, malicious web pages, since it is an alternative to an external browser, event uh, hijacking and event sniffing, and framing and clickjacking. Okay, so are any of these? Okay, I know the top three we have. We've talked about event sniffing, hijacking, framing, and clickjacking. Is that new to you guys, or are you fairly familiar with all four of those terms? And that kind of lets me know whether I need to keep this pace or if I have to slow down when we go through that. New to me, okay, not heard of clickjacking. Okay, okay, all right. So slow down through a couple of them. The other ones, I think we can just run through. All right, so JavaScript injection kind of is what it says it is. Um, it's a client side issue. It's a client side attack. Um, Essentially, I'm going to execute a piece of script that is going to be nefarious and confuse the user into doing something that I want it to do versus what they think they're going to do. Um, it's important to note that JavaScript is disabled in WebView by default. So you have to expressly invoke it. So that leads to question: why would I directly invoke something that is, number one on the hit list as far as the vulnerability? And then if I do have to invoke it, what do I do? Okay, so I can't get around it because this is just kind of how the web or the app works. So I will force it, force any JavaScript operating in WebView, since now I'm dealing with external network connectivity, WebView being the giveaway there. I'm going to force it to use HTTPS through that interface. Okay. So that's your takeaway there. Just it's disabled by default. Leave it disabled unless you absolutely have to, but then require it to use HTTPS for its execution. Local file access through WebView. So we understand that the local files, you're going to be storing sensitive data. Often there's no way around it. However, disabling local file access through WebView, to me, once again, it just seems common sense, right? Through the web portion of anything, why do I need to call back into the local file? Um, that should be operating, or I should do everything I can to only allow access to local files, and especially sensitive data within the sandbox environment of the app, and not expose it to HTTP at all. Okay. um, so I mean, simply but this is not disabled by default. So you actually have to go in and invoke the setting to disallow or deny access to the local storage or local files, with set allow file access in the WebView settings as false. Okay, because by default it's set at true. Malicious web pages. Okay, so we dealt with this again in the last section, so I don't think we need to go really back through it. What they are and how they run. If I do, by all means, raise your hands. But I think we just did this about 30 minutes ago. Okay. Okay, so now we're to some, I guess, new pieces for some people: event sniffing and event hijacking. So. Essentially what event sniffing is doing is it kind of it is kind of what it sounds. It's a passive action. It is not directed. Think of it as a bucket. As as the user navigates, all I want to do is sit and observe. And then, every URL you visit, I'm going to just drop that in my bucket. I don't want to do anything with it right now. I just want to collect collect the data. Okay. And when we think of all the data that gets entered, for instance, in web pages, whether it be usernames and passwords, whether it be credit cards or birthdays, social security numbers, just by doing simple event sniffing as form data is submitted, I never have to perform an active exploit. Against your data. All I have to do is at some point offload the data um, from the form fillers. Okay, so that's what event sniffing is versus event hijacking, where I'm actually getting between the action, right? You are carrying out a set of instruction or a set of action. I am hijacking your intent. You intend to hit close, you hit close, and all of a sudden it opens up another window, right? So I'm hijacking what your intent is to redirect you to where I want you to go. Okay, so sniffing passive, whereas hijacking is active, right? So that's the delineation you need to make between the two. Sniffing, I don't need to perform active attack. I'll attack later. I just need to offload the data. Whereas event hijacking, it is going to be an active attack where I'm going to force redirect you to where I want you to go versus the button you thought you clicked to close the browser. You're going to open another browser session. Okay. Framing and clickjacking. So framing and clickjacking, it got real popular for a long time, and then it kind of just died away. And now we're seeing it come back, and maybe it was because we stopped paying so much attention to it. Um, I don't know. It kind of just died off, and then it just came back, right? So clickjacking is very similar to event hijacking, right? So essentially, what it is I'm going to trick the user into clicking a link that they didn't intend to, right? It's going to redirect their intent somewhere. It is done through the iframe. iframe, nothing more, and I'm sure you guys has experienced Java coders. A page within a page, right? You bring up a page and it has all this annoying stuff, advertisements or whatever, running at the bottom or on the sides or whatever. All those are iframes, right? Now, those are ones that for instance, are visible. uh, what clickjacking does is it injects essentially an invisible iframe. You don't know it's there, but within the overlay, they will overlay a force redirect to their site when you clicked close. You hit the close button. What you can't see is there's an invisible or a clear iframe or a transparent iframe on top of the close button, and it it hijacks your intent and sends you to another site. Okay, so very similar to event hijacking. Um, but what you're looking for, to the delineation between them, while the actions are extremely similar, find iframe. You find iframe in the question, you know they're talking about clickjacking versus event hijacking. Okay, so that's what, just highlight it, put a star next to it, whatever you got to do, because event hijacking and clickjacking are very similar in intent. One is just carried out through a different means, um, and the mode or the method is the iframe. Okay, that's how clickjacking um, is performed. You might also see it referred to as a UI uh, readdress attack. Okay, UI redress attack. Same same thing. Clickjacking, UI redress attack. So it's just easier to say clickjacking, right? Yeah, I think it's more fun to say clickjacking sometimes too. Okay, so how do I invoke, or how do I use or enable WebView in a more secure manner than the out of the box configuration? So first and foremost, being that JavaScript is not enabled by default, uh, don't enable it. Okay, so that is a good start. Ensure that you wrote and control all HTML within the web view, including iframes, right? So if you're going to permit iframes to be run, it should be iframes that you intended to put there, rather than permitting external servers to inject into your application, right? Within the WebView component. Disable the plugins. Okay, so once again, that kind of, to me, one of those obvious ones. And disable local file system access, right? I mean, you just don't need it within the web view itself, right? Once again, it should be running in a sandboxed environment, at least accessing the local file system within the sandbox environment of the app. So just disable the ability to get there. You do that through the WebView settings and just set allow file access to false, and you'll be fine. Okay, so what, three, well, four rules of thumb to follow, and you pretty much have the secure operation of WebView uh, understood. Okay, uh, it's not going to get much easier than that. Okay, um, and that really is, I mean, that I mean that's that is this module, right? So clickjacking, or I'm sorry, WebView, for being so nefarious with issues. Um, a lot of it is self-invoked, right? Programmers, application developers, enabling the JavaScript because they think it's making their job easier to do things, when they're just actually opening up vulnerabilities that just don't need to be there. Okay, um, that is the top, bottom, up and down of secure web view operation. This is just reiterating more of the same. I think maybe the only new information here might be trap URL loading events in the web view. Um, that's the same as a new way of saying the same thing they said on the last slide, which is you control all HTML, right? So what is URL loading? All you're doing is loading up an HTML page. You should be controlling that within the WebView component, within the WebView environment, versus allowing the remote server to load within WebView for yourself. Okay, um, and that will clear that, or cover that whole section for you. So, and now you see why we moved directly into it, because it just was that that short. Okay, so there is a lab associated with this one. Once again, it's almost as short as the slides that are associated with it. We're at looks like the top of the hour. So what we'll do is we'll take a short break here, um, and then we will attack the last component for the night. I think it will move just about as quickly as this one. Okay. All right. So let's take 10 minutes here, and then we'll be back. All right. Okay. We all back. Technically, we still have a couple more minutes, but we're all back. There's no reason why we can't get started. There's only 20 modules through this slide, or through this section. We can go ahead and start if everyone's here. Steve and Karen are here. Paul usually answers up, at least with something uh, humorous. So he must not be back yet. All right. Well, that's a quick couple minutes. Okay, so um, let's see if we can power through this module. Like I said, there's only 20 slides or so, and once again, there's just when I look at it, there's not a whole lot of context here for you. It's more content, a lot of things that we've already touched on. Okay, so dealing with protecting credentials, both in storage and in transit. I'm sure that you can imagine what the overwhelming theme is going to be through this component. You're probably going to start seeing more about encryption, more about obfuscation, hiding what you're doing versus showing it in the light of day, especially now that we've moved into not only local access and external devices like SD cards, but we've moved outside the device where we have a whole lot less control onto the network to perform action in transit. Okay, dealing with how do we protect these credentials, these passwords in storage and in transit? What are some of the best practices that we should employ? One of them, absolutely. Each time the app is launched, uh, force the user to re-authenticate. Um, Encourage or even require um, complex passwords or long passwords, um, rather than opt for the pure convenience of being able to open the app and go. I think most of us have gotten used to, or actually, I don't mind, for instance, opening up, my email app, for instance, and having to enter a 4 or a 6 or a 10 digit PIN, maybe not an entire password, just to ensure that the data, in case my phone is being operated by someone other than me, um, that the data that I want to maintain confidentiality with continues to enjoy that level of protection. And then once the app is launched and the user reauthenticates, you invoke strong encryption, right? Require strong encryption. Uh, it should not be an option. It just should run by default. That anything operating in transit, especially, will be using some sort of encryption protocol as the data is transmitted. So now we start seeing the same terms over again. So basic authentication is what it sounds like. Uh, Digest authentication, API based authentication, and token based authentication would be the two new concepts introduced here. Um, so those will be the ones that I spend the most time on versus any of the others. Okay, so HTTP basic authentication, uh, not encrypted, no hashes, is what it is. Um, the passwords are sent um, as they sent, right? Um, so that is the biggest issues that we start dealing with. Passwords sent with each request, and it's not encrypted or hashed. Big no-nos. I don't think any of you at this point are going to perform such actions. Digest authentication. Okay, so digest authentication, as we spoke about in the last module, or actually the module before. Um, it's performing a hash of the credentials. Um, However, the content is not encrypted. Digest authentication is just that. It's obfuscating the initial credentials, but all content is still sent over the clear text protocol of HTTP. Okay, so don't think or confuse uh, the idea that just because the credentials are obfuscated, that the content is protected as well. We haven't gotten to that point of content protection yet. This is still only dealing with credential or authentication protection more than content or data protection. Okay, so API based authentication. Once again, this is the new concept introduced here. Um, so want to make sure that you have a good understanding of what the API based authentication is. So the credentials login, it produces a token, right? I don't know if you guys are familiar with how, for instance, Kerberos works. Um, uh, but as I was trying to keep this straight in my head, right, it kept sounding more and more like Kerberos. Because now I'm starting, instead of dealing with, tickets and ticket granting services and ticket granting tickets, I'm dealing with tokens. Uh, it made sense in my head. It may make sense in yours. It may not. Um, but that's kind of how I thought about it, right? So the credentials login, they produce a security token. That token is what's passed to all the methods that are being called within the app structure. Um, Once you log out or it times out, the token at that point expires, and then you have to go back and get a new token to re-authenticate or re engage within the architecture. So once again, it sounds a whole lot like Kerberos because now I'm dealing with things that expire and re-authentication to same objects. It does add a lot of complexity to the coding process. However, it is very commonplace, well supported, so it shouldn't be shied away from by any stretch of the imagination just because of the additional layers of complexity to it, because the upside benefit does, in many cases, once again, depending on the sensitivity of the data, outweigh the complexity requirements of invoking API based authentication. So some of the threats to the credentials that we have to deal with. Once again, this isn't necessarily new stuff for you. It should be commonplace. Stored passwords on the device can be retrieved. Uh, More often than anything else, passwords are stored in a flat text, plain text file. So if it's stored on the device, it can be retrieved. Hashes, even the hashes stored on the device, because you can mount the device externally without invoking the operating system, um, can be retrieved, and then rainbow tables invoked. And then, of course, the universal weak link are the users. Often, they're going to use the same password over and over and over again on a myriad of sites. 10 to 20 sites, you're going to have the same password. So if I crack one or can capture one, then now let's go to that file that is running the sniffer that captured every URL that you went to, and then I just try those credentials against the URLs that I've dumped from your phone. Your odds are very good that you have used that same password on more than half of those visited URLs. Um, However, it can be mitigated by requiring, for instance, multi-factor authentication. Now, these modules didn't go very deeply into the factors of authentication. One factor, two factor, multi-factor. Um, so I think it's taken for granted that you understand multi-factor authentication. Is that a good assumption for me to continue on, that you understand multi-factor authentication, or do I need to explain? Um, okay, Todd says yes. Karen says yes. Okay, all right, good. So we're good on multi-factor authentication. So we can kind of keep trucking with it. Okay, so basic core strategies, right? So right there we see at the top, multi-factor authentication require. You see a lot of banks now. I know my banks switched to it about 2 years ago or so. I log in with my username, and then it shows me an image to let me know that I've landed on the right page. If I don't recognize that image, then I know that I'm not where I think I am, so I don't enter password credentials at that time. Complex passwords, once again, we're not going to go through that. Uh, Hiding account numbers or just obfuscating numbers altogether. I think we know what it looks like to obfuscate the numbers. Showing the last four of a social versus showing all the digits of a social. Um, so the new piece here that we haven't dealt with is the use of the secure cookie setting. Set cookie dot set secure. What is it doing? What it is doing is it's setting a secure flag on the header to ensure um, essentially protecting against, for instance, event hijacking. Okay, that's why you would tie it, for instance, to a specific IP address. So it couldn't be used later from another device. It's only good for that particular device and that session experience. Okay. Another way to attempt to secure data streams or data transmission is you can tie to the device identifiers, uh, MEIDs, UUIDs, MAC addresses. Uh, they have advantages, and obviously anything with an up has a down, right? So understanding what each one of them does maybe helps understand whether or not it might be a good method. Um, to use to secure a stream of data from a particular device. However, it should be understood, right? Device IDs. When you start tying to device IDs, you get into privacy issues. So once again, if you're developing an application, that has HIPAA implications or Sarbanes-Oxley, um, all of them have large privacy components. FISMA, NIST, major privacy components, tying to the device ID, depending on what identifier you're using, can be used to track the individual user. So you have to choose wisely when it comes to tying to a device ID. And it's not completely reliable at all, right? I mean, the device IDs are not necessarily static. They will vary somewhat from, for instance, carrier to carrier. And then, of course, Mac spoofing is not hard to do. So if you're relying on, for instance, tying it to a MAC address, the ability to spoof a MAC address um, is I think it's taught in high schools at this point, right? So those are some of the considerations to deal with when you start dealing with tying uh, to the device ID itself. Um, okay, so token-based authentication. Token-based authentication. I mean, it's not new. I mean, but it's new to this discussion. Um, Essentially, what you are doing, um, you're providing a level of surety or power, if you will, uh, for the application to begin to act on its own behalf. Uh, you see this a lot with web applications to be able to act on their own behalf without the need for constant reauthentication. The Android platform has kind of adopted most everything that is commonplace in web UI design and security into the Android ecosystem. So important is knowing how the web authentication or the token-based authentication operates and works. Three basic steps. Remember, we talked about ID, authn, and author. You can't do one without the other, and they have to happen in that order. So the app first is making request um, for service, right? How is that app making the request? Well, it's being invoked by the ID, right? The user providing credentials, right? So there's your ID portion of it, and they've joined it with the author, right? User identifies themselves, authorizes at that point the app to then begin causing action. The credentials, once authorized, sent to that particular storage, or I'm sorry, service provider. Um, and at that point, all requests upgrade themselves to allow the application to work on its own behalf. There's no further need or requirement to re-authenticate. Okay. Um, so yes, it's going to reduce, for instance, password fatigue for having to constantly re-authenticate into uh, things over and over again, and having to keep track of 30 or 40 different passwords. But understand the power that you are now authorizing the application itself to do. If any of the prior modules are not exercised well, limiting broadcast, giving direct intent, turning over that kind of power to the application to not require further authentication can become problematic, right? And I think that we can see how that can be a problem. Okay, so now we have our four core methods of credential passing. You know, basic, working with the digest, going through API or token authentication. Uh, Still, we got to store these credentials somewhere. The credentials, essentially what you're dealing with is you're storing in the keychain. What does the keychain do? We spoke about a couple of nights ago, I believe. It's providing controlled access to the system key store. Okay. Within the key store, once again, this is new stuff. We talked about all the CA certificates themselves, the user certificates, and the user's private key, all in the key store. You need or you're required to launch an intent with the keychain to enable the user to associate a certificate with your app, right? So once again, this is direct, not implied intent. You have to launch that intent with the keychain to associate any certificate, CA, user, or private, um, so it can interchange with your app in the key store. Okay. Um, why are you frozen? Oh, oh, it's not behaving. Oh, there we go. Okay. I think I actually went one too far. Okay. Private key access. Private key access. Once so now we're back to content, less context. Within the keychain setting, the keychain choose private key uh, is going to call back or invoke your private key. It's going to choose the certificate, to be shown, um, and then it's going to make a call to get private key on a background thread, right? So why a background thread? We're talking about a private key, right? There, this is the one key that must be protected at all costs. So it's going to get that private key um, to avoid interference. Okay, that's essentially the whole purpose behind the call of get private key, and it's going to get it on a background thread or a covert channel outside of, or actually inside a protected environment of the key store. Um, the important pieces to remember of the keychain itself is it is using 128 AES encryption with CBC mode. CBC, I don't know if that's new or not to you. CBC would be referring to cipher block chaining. 128-bit encryption or AES 128-bit encryption with cipher block chaining, pretty strong encryption. Okay, it's using MD5, which is a very strong hashing algorithm to verify the integrity of the data itself, and the master key itself is encrypted with AES encryption. Okay, so all of this to tell you the keychain is invoking a high level of data protection against confidentiality and integrity, because it is literally the keys to the kingdom. Once compromised, Once the keychain is compromised, essentially all credentials at that point must be revoked and cannot be trusted. Okay. Um, yeah, so this isn't, I would assume, I know because we've dealt with it, that this isn't new, right? Whenever you're transmitting any level of credential, it is in danger of intercept um, and compromise. We begin mitigating in layers. First, at the database layer, can't handle there. We move farther into the device at the file layer. As we exit the device, the intent is to invoke from HTTP to HTTPS to initiate the SSL tunnel. So now the credentials can be passed um, through the tunnel versus in the clear. Okay, the account manager is providing the support for this token passing. Uh, what it is essentially doing is because we know that the credentials have to be passed over insecure or otherwise untrusted networks, it's going to pass the token that's associated with the credential. Via the credential itself. Okay, so once again, we're back to token passing. Um, again, I see pictures of Kerberos to kind of keep straight in your in your mind. Okay, if that makes sense. If the Kerberos example isn't working for you, I mean, let me know. I'll see if I can come up with another one to make a picture stick in your head. Um, but when I start dealing, with how to keep this apart, to me, that's just the easiest kind of method or mode to think of. Okay. Um, okay. So here's a pretty picture of what, for instance, the keychain is going to be invoking into the key store for. We can just take a look, right, of all the registered accounts that are here, right? Email, Facebook, Gmail, into my cloud storage, Twitter accounts. It goes on and on and on. So imagine how dangerous it is and can be um, if the keychain were to be compromised. Because on the backside of all these accounts, right, that you see listed, um, those credentials are in a flat plain text file on the backside. Right? That's why it's being wrapped up in the key store. In the key store itself. That's just how databases work. They work best uh, on obfuscated data. One too many. Okay, so once again, we'll just recap the takeaways. Make sure that it sticks in your head um, as it applies to storing credentials, right? First, avoid, if you can, forcing users to frequently authenticate. Now, frequently is a very soft word, right? What is frequent? Uh, is it once every 5 minutes? Is it once every 10 minutes? Only you, as the designer, once you identify the sensitivity level of the data, will be able to answer that question as to what is frequent. But that is one of the keys. Layered defense, right? We talked about that earlier. Multi-factor authentication. Okay, provide username, show picture. Now I know I'm in the right place. Now I can enter my password authentication, ID, authent, and author has been completed, and I can do it in a secure mode. Force sessions to expire, right? So they should have to re-authenticate to the application. Um, once they close out of the session or it times out. Um, Use the secure cookie setting, right? All it's doing is enforcing SSL TLS, right, with the cookies. Okay, so that is why it's there. Force the encryption once you open the transmission channel, and then obviously avoid WebView for authentication and authorization. Right, make them go into the app to perform the ID authent and author, and not use a subsequent or an outside browser to get that done. Okay. So on the slides originally that I provided, it didn't have these two addresses for Stack Overflow and Android developer site. So I went ahead and added them here, and at the close of the session. On Monday, all of these apps all these slides with the highlighted keywords and everything to make your studying easier. I'm going to be posting up there so you'll be able to pull it down. But these are absolutely a wealth of information as far as overall design and implementation, and it really does. Especially Stack Overflow has some really great. Um, Discussion threads, just watching people solve some problems. So once again, I'll make these available to you at the close of the session. Okay. Um, this not a lot of content here for you. I mean, you can kind of pin this up on your wall, but this is just really a rehash of the steps that we walked through for how an authentication token is being passed around. Um, Vice, for instance, digesting or authentication digest for authentication, the check and balance through each. Okay, so once again, not a lot of content here for you. It's more contextual based. It'll look pretty on your wall, I think, is the takeaway there. Okay, and that. I promised you it would go quick, and well, I guess I did run 4 minutes over, so I apologize for that. But that is section 9. Um, so, as promised, all three sections tonight. A quick show of hands. I mean, was this pace good for you? If so, Monday will go extremely quick for you. Did I move too fast for anyone? Um, Slow down for you? Nope. Good. Okay. Okay. Good. Okay. And I always get a little concerned that maybe I glossed over something that I think is um, elementary in nature, and uh, maybe make a wrong assumption. So I always want to check with you guys, make sure I'm moving at a pace that's comfortable for you to learn, because ultimately that's the goal here, right? Is you to learn. I'm not going to go exercise this exam again. So, okay. That is to 7, 8, and 9. If you're keeping score, that gives us one module to go through on Monday, which will be the final module of section 10. So like I said, if this is a good pace for you, Monday should be a short evening. Um, so at this point, if you guys don't have any further questions, or about any of the content that we covered tonight, I appreciate your time, and I'll get this lecture converted and put up onto the YouTube channel probably sometime tomorrow afternoon, and then send you out a link. So have a good night. Appreciate your attendance and your participation. Picked up quite nicely tonight, and I'll see you on Monday.